The Drama of the 19th Century, Part 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Drama of the 19th Century by Voltairine de Cleyre. The passions of men are actors, events are their motions, all history is their speech. In the long play of the ages a human being sometimes becomes an event, a nation's passion takes a personnel. Such beings are the expression of the gathered mind force of millions. He only who keeps himself aloof from all feeling can remain the spectator of the hour. All that humanity which is held within the beating, coiling, surging tides of passion has no individuality. It sinks its personality to become a vein in the limb of this giant, a pulse in the heart of that Titan. Only when out of the spirit of the times the event is born, only when the act is complete, the curtain rung down, only then does the intellectuality of the vein, the pulse, rise to the level of the dispassionate. Only then can it survey a tragedy and say, "This was necessary," a reaction and say, "This was inevitable." Yet as a drop of blood is a quivering, living, flashing ruby beside the dead, pale pearl of a stagnant pool, so is one drop of feeling a shining thing, a living thing, beside the deadness of the intellect which judges while the heart is stone. Beside those quiet bayous of brain which reflect back the images of them very purely, very stilly, giving no heed to the great rushing river of heart that rolls on, hurries on so close beside them. By and by, the river reaches the grand great sea, and the waters spread out calm and deep, so deep that the stars of the upper sea, the lights of the higher life, shine far up from them as a babe smiles up into its mother's eyes, and up still to the distant source of the light within the eyes. It is to men and women of feeling that I speak, men and women of the millions, men and women in the hurrying current, not to the shallow egotist who holds himself apart, and with the Phariseeism of intellectuality exclaims, "I am more just than thou," but to those whose every fibre of being is vibrating with emotion as aspen leaves quiver in the breath of storm. To those whose hearts swell with a pity at the pitiful toil of women, the weariness of young children, the handcuff helplessness of strong men. To those whose blood runs quick along the veins like wildfire on the dry grass of prairies when the wind whirls aside the smokings of the holocaust, and courting the teeth of the flame, the black priestess, injustice, beckons it on while her feet stamp on the cinders of the sacrifice. To those whose heartstrings thrill at the touch of love like the sweet, low, musical laugh of childhood, or thrum with hate like the singing vibration of the bowstring speeding the arrow of death. I speak to those whose eyes behold all things through a haze of grey, or rose, or gold, born of their surroundings, and which mist slips away only when the gaze is levelled on that dead past, whose passions and whose deeds are ended, to whom the present is always a morning with the dimness of morning around it, the past clear and still no veil on its face, for the veil has been shredded asunder. For he only who intensely perceives the nature of his surroundings, and he only who has felt, and keenly felt, all the throbs and throes of life, can judge with any degree of truth the action of that which is past. You who have loved, you who have joyed, you who have suffered, it belongs to you to people the silent streets of the silent cities with forms now vanished, to comprehend something of the passions which animated their action. It belongs to you to understand how the fury of a great energy, striking terrible aimless blows in the dark, may yet, across the chasm of awful mistake, touch the hand of a greater justice. If from a panoramic survey of the past some wisdom may be gathered, then let the dramas of old ages tell us what have been the mainsprings of their motions, so we shall understand what action ushered in the drama of the 19th century. Westward the star of empire holds its way. Following the course of those majestic spheres of fire which whirl each in its vast ellipse, treading away in a long, southwesterly path athwart the heavens, obedient to that superior attraction which through all the universe holds good, the attraction of greater for lesser things, the tide of our life upon our world has risen and swelled and rolled away to the south and west. Away in the orient source of the sunlight, away where the glitter of eyes shines up to meet the morning, nations have risen and plunged down impetuously over the sleeping regions of darkness and of heat, bearing with them the breeze-stirring life of the north and the on-treading light of the East. And out of this conquered earth have arisen the mixed passions of another life and another race. Still the governing stars wheel on, and the tide of life which paused only to gather strength rolls up again, and once more a nation is born, and new passions dictate the action of the peoples. Down, down it sweeps over the Altaian hills, over the Himalayan ranges, over the land of the Euphrates and Tigris, over the deserts of Arabia the barren, the fields of Arabia the stony, and the grasses and waters of Arabia the happy, to those low shores, the home of dark mausoleums and darker pyramids, on to the now classic land of Greece and golden Italy, and the home of the dark-eyed Moors. Sweeps till it touches the frothing sea, and brightly borne upon its upper crest, shines the glory, the splendor, the magnificence of the warring powers which dictated the action of Greece and Rome. For centuries their hoisted spears send back the burnished glitter of the sun, and then the light dies out. Down rushing from the Northland again the tide of vigor pours, and the health and strength of barbarism conquers the weakness of a tottering civilization. Far away over the miles of sparkling sea, in the darkness and the silence, a continent lies waiting, waiting for the coming of the light, waiting for the swelling of the tide. Slowly at last a ripple creeps over the strange beach, and the flood rolls on, and again a continent becomes a cradle, and the empire star sends on its rays to kiss the forehead of the rising world. Over the breadth of all our continent that mighty wave is flowing still. Standing today almost upon the threshold of another world, and looking back down this long-vistaed past, gradually there dawns upon reflection's vision, gradually there grows out of the confusion of forms and the babel of sounds, a clearer perception of the motor powers which have dictated the action of this past, a better idea of the grand plot which, driven by these motor powers, the passions are working out. For above the long procession of scenes and events, above the monster massings of happiness and woe, above war and peace of centuries, above the nations that have risen and fallen, above the life and above the grave, the winged and shadowy embodiments of two great ideas float and rest. And those two principles are called authority and liberty, or, if it please you better, God and liberty. The one is all clad in the purple and scarlet of pomp and of power, while the other stands a glorious shining centre in the white radiance of freedom. Yet not always. Far back in time authority stood on thrones and altars, with the plumed sables of despotism waving on his brow, while in his hands he held two iron gyves, the one to fetter thought, the other to fetter action, and these two gyves were called the Church and the State. Liberty! Ah, liberty was then a name scarcely to pass the lips, dreamed of only in solitude, spoken of only in dungeons. Yet out of the blackest mire the whitest lily blooms. Out of the dungeon, out of the sorrow, out of the sacrifice, out of the pain grew this child of the heart, and pure and strong she grew until the sabled plumes have tottered on the despot's brow, and a great palsy shakes the hands that once so firmly held the gyves of Church and State. For ever seeking to overthrow each other, the one for the aggrandizement of self, the other for the love of all mankind, these two powers have contended, and every energy, every passion, every desire, good or evil, has been ranged on this side or on that, blunderingly or wisely, and nations have swung to and fro in their breath as upon a hinge. And one by one the powers of authority have crippled, and step by step liberty has advanced, until today mankind is beginning to measure the forces that, struggling blindly together, are yet evolving light, to drink in the sublime ideal of freedom. Yet oh, how long the struggle with vested ignorance, with greed and power! When upon the drama of the 19th century the curtain rose, liberty, triumphant on the younger shores, lay prone and hurled in Europe. Against 15 centuries of crowned and throned and tithed curse and woe unutterable, she had risen with such a fearful convulsive strength, that when she had mown down king, priest, and throne, and gorged the guillotine with blood, she sank back, exhausted from the struggle, and the hated tyrant rose again. The wild desire to conquer, to possess, to control, to hold in subjection, seemed to dominate with an unconquerable strength, and the gathered mind force of millions of people wrought itself into the single brain of Napoleon Bonaparte. This human being became an event, this nation's passion took a personnel. The spirit of the times produced this man, and authority smiled as one after another the despots of Europe plotted and planned, only to be overthrown by this incarnation of ambition, while the scenes were shifted from the Vineland to the Rhineland, from the Sunland to the Snowland, and through them all the great event glowed out, lit high by the rust-red light. How well the plot was working! The empire triumphant, nations subjected, the fetter of action closing its terrible teeth, liberty manacled on the left, the armies of God massing their forces, advancing, preparing to close down the iron jaw of the iron gyve upon the right, to imprison thought, to re-establish the union of fetters, to link up the broken chains, to burden human hope and human will and human life once more with the awful oppression of church and state. But liberty will not, cannot die. Wounded and bruised and pinioned sore, condemned to the use of instruments that were none of hers, she wrought with England's jealousy, with Wellington's emulation, with fear, with love, with hate. Impelled by one motive or another, the nations of the coalition moved in concert. Napoleon had been Marengo, he had been Austerlitz, he became Waterloo, and when across that awful field rolled the last long cannon boom, when the silence settled, when the quick and the dead lay sleeping and the wounded died, justice and suffering touched hands across the gulf of blood, and liberty heard them whisper, Sic semper tyrannis. In the tableau that followed, she, the ideal of our dreams, still stood pale and fettered, but a smile lit up her face, and a light gleamed in her eyes, as she saw authority reel and stagger from the blow which, though it did not sever, yet shattered half the strength of both its fetters. For the strength of God lies in a vast unity, an ownership of ideas backed up by the brute force under the command of the individual in whom that ownership of ideas is vested, while the strength of liberty lies in the very essence of things themselves, the fact that no law or force can ever destroy the individualities of existence, and of necessity the natural tendency to break all bonds which seek to control thought, and all force which locks up those bonds entailing liberty of action as the outcome of liberty of thought. And just in proportion as churches have become dismembered and states have been broken up, no matter that each new church and each new state were but another form of despotism, just in that proportion has the principle of liberty been served, for each new religious establishment has been an assertion of the right to think differently from the fashionable creed, each change has been a movement away from the centralization of power. So with Waterloo in the background, with authority lashed to impotent rage before it, and liberty pinioned, yet with the lit smile still upon her countenance, the tableau light flames up and dies, and the curtain falls upon the first great act. Those who think, those who feel, those who hope, know why that smile was there. For looking away over the long blue roll of water that swelled like an interlude between, she beheld the sublime opening scene of the act that followed. Far up the wonderful stage the distant mountains lift their circling crests, at their feet the waters sweep like a march of music, vast acres of untrodden grass-land shower their emerald wealth, nearer the front the lower hills rise up, and then the short Atlantic slope, all rife with busy life, bends down to meet the sea. On the right the hoarfrost sheens and shines on the majestic northern forests, while the glittering earth, dipped in its bath of frozen crystal, spreads like a field of diamonds. On the left the white flakes of the orange bloom fall like a shimmering bridal veil, the wind floats up like a perfume, and the lazy, lazy languor of warmth creeps all about. Behind it all, behind the hills and the prairies and the lifted summits, the mystical golden light of the west drops down, filling the dim-lit distance with the glory of promise. The silver light of the Empire Star glides over the Atlantic slope, and its rays, like guiding fingers, point onward to the gathering shadows. Now the passions of men begin to move up this vast platform with an energy never before witnessed. Diverted from their old-time channels of struggle against the oppression of gods and kings and the bitterness of birth-hatred, with a freedom of opportunity denied in the old world, and with such unstinted natural resources waiting for the magic transformer, the genius of humanity, ambition of power, avarice, pride, jealousy, all those motors born out of the old regime of a state-propped God, bred and multiplied through generations till they have come to be looked upon as natural laws of human existence, began to work together to plant this untrodden earth, to sow in its furrows the seed of a newer race, and, paradoxical as it may sound, to work for their own destruction, their final elimination from the human brain. Or perhaps it were more correct to say, that with the barriers of old institutions taken away, they naturally begin their retransformation into those beautiful sentiments from which they are originally warped, distorted, misshapen by that warped, distorted, misshapen idea called God. So do they inaugurate the grand era of development, so do they answer the oft-repeated question, what incentive would there be for labor or genius if the institutions that compel them to struggle were broken down? Look at the stage of the past and see. Never before had thought been so free, never before had ability been less cramped, less starved, or less compelled. And never before did genius dare so much for purposes so great. Never before did the engines which drive the tide of life along a continent send forth a stream of so much vigor. A new light breaks along the pathway of the stars, and swells and rolls and floods the great scene with a dawn burst so magnificent that the very hills blush in its rising splendor. It is the dawn which the night of God so long held shrouded. It is that which is born when superstition dies. It is that phoenix which rises from the ashes of religion. It is that clear, bent flame of all the great forces of nature, brought to the knowledge of mankind by delving reason, and shot like northern streamers from the heart of her the Church of God so long held throttled, Science. It is that which shone reflected in the eyes of Liberty when pale and manacled she stood before the field of Waterloo. The ray of the under earth came up to join the ray of the clouds shot down. The energies of sky and mine and sea were clasped to bring down the wealth of the mountains to the shore, and to transport the life of the now populous strip of slope to the unclaimed regions of the west. In the broad blaze of light the scene is shifted, the golden effulgence melts and flows around that sea-girdled kingdom, where quietly but surely the two great engines of authority are being shriven apart. The dynasties of kings are growing dusty, much of their power is but a legend. The Church is shrinking in her garments. The desires of this people are slow to move, but deeply rooted and strong, and so far as they have moved forward, they have never moved back. There have been no gigantic strides, no reactions. Little by little the idea of divinely delegated power has been crippled till the English bishop and the English lord have become mere titled mockeries in comparison with their ancient feudal meaning. But stop! Close lying there, almost beneath her stretching shadows, another island flashes like a green star in its sea-blue setting. And from that island there rises up the cry of a great devotion, clinging blindly to its greatest curse, its priest-hedged God, while persecuting even unto death by the fanaticism of another faith, and the pleading of hunger, while day long and night long the shuttle flies in the flax-loom, and the earth yields her golden fruition, only to lade the ships that bear it away from the famine-white lips and the toil-hardened hands that produced it. Blindly devotion prays to its God, that God whom it calls all-wise, all-powerful, and all-just, and the English lord, who cannot thus subdue his own countrymen, reaches out the long arm of the law across the channel for his rent, and with God looking on it is given, and still, while the hollow-eyed women kneel at the altar for help, the scene widens out, and away in the distance the seven-hilled city lifts up from the sea, and from the dome of the Vatican, from that great mortared hill of God, the Vicar of Christ calls out, "My tribute, my Peter-pence!" and with God looking on it is given. And then from the foot of that tear-stained altar, where so many lips of woe have pressed, where so many helpless hands have clasped, where so many hearts have broken, comes the ironical promise of Jehovah, "Ask and thou shalt receive." Oh, God is a very promising personage indeed, very promising, but like some of his disciples, very poor pay. Liberty, shadowed, invisible, yet a muffled voice is repeating the words which not so long ago rang from the lips of one who stood almost beneath the shadow of the scaffold, who walks today in prison gloom. Ye see me only in your cells, ye see me only in the grave, ye see me only wandering lone beside the exile's sullen wave. Ye fools! Do I not also live where ye have sought to pierce in vain? Rests not a nook for me to dwell in every heart, in every brain? Not every brow that boldly thinks erect with manhood's honest pride? Does not each bosom shelter me that beats with honor's generous tide? Not every workshop brooding woe, not every hut that harbors grief? Ha! am I not the breath of life that pants and struggles for relief? Ah, poor panting, struggling, misery laden Ireland! How God laughs with glee to see his shackles weight your misery. The scene is shifting. The stage is darkening. A strange eclipse obscures the shafted light. Darker, darker. Now a low, red fire gleams like a winking eye along the foreground. It runs, it hisses like a snake. There another leaps up. There another. France, Germany, Italy, the continent blazes with the fires of the Commune. That spirit which, drunken with blood, reeled from the guillotine at '93 to be crushed beneath the upbuilding of the Empire has once more arisen. And out of the hot hells of fury, and jealousy, and hate, out of the pitiless struggle between vested rights and wrongs with high ancestral lineage, and the great outcrying of a piteous ignorance against the oppression whose injustice it feels, but cannot analyze, grows the sublime idea which priests have anathematized and states have outlawed, the sacred dogma of equality. In so far as that ideal was made possible of conception, in so far as the masses began to understand something of the causes of their ills, in so far as the purpose of liberty was served, no matter that the arms of oppression were triumphant, the dawn of the thought of equal liberty upon the mass of the unthinking was a far greater victory than any triumph of arms. So when the fires died down, and the low reflection gleamed for an instant over those quiescent Indian valleys and Altian ranges, where the main plot of old centuries had been laid, and then paled out before the white flare lighting the tableau of the second act, Liberty stood, with chained hands lifted toward her enemy, while a proud look, playing like an iridescent flame in her eyes, said, plain as lips could speak it, "I have unbound their thoughts, they will one day unbind my hands." Slowly the curtain falls on the fair prisoner and the glowering God. End of Part 1 of the Drama of the 19th Century.